The rifle crack echoed across frozen ground, but Cole Maddox didn't flinch. He stood alone in the yard as three armed men circled his porch, demanding what wasn't theirs. The winter storm howling behind them wasn't half as cold as the look in his eyes. For 15 years, no man, no woman, no force of nature had moved Cole Maddox. He'd built his empire on silence, discipline, and an iron will that bent for nothing. But beneath the ice, something was breaking. This is the story of the most unreachable man in Harmon Creek, and the woman who never tried to reach him. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The town of Harmon Creek sat like a scar across the high plains, carved into existence by men too stubborn to quit and too broken to go home. It wasn't the kind of place you chose. It was where you ended up when everywhere else had given up on you, or you'd given up on everywhere else. Cole Maddox had arrived 15 years ago with nothing but a horse, a bedroll, and a silence so complete it seemed to fill the space around him like smoke. Nobody knew where he'd come from. Nobody asked. In Harmon Creek, a man's past was his own business, and Cole made it clear from the first day that his business was closed. He'd claimed the hardest piece of land in the territory, rocky soil, bitter water, slopes so steep you could break your neck just walking them. The old-timers had laughed, said he'd be gone before first snow, but Cole worked that land like he was punishing it. Dawn to dusk, through heat that cracked the earth and cold that froze tools to bare hands, he built fence lines that ran true as surveyor marks and corrals that could hold a stampede. By the end of the first year, he had a cabin. By the third, a barn that put the town livery to shame. By the fifth, he was running cattle that brought top dollar in 3 territories, and the men who'd laughed were asking him for work. He never hired a one of them. Cole Maddox ran his ranch alone, not because he couldn't afford help. Everyone knew he could, but because he preferred it that way. Control, precision, routine. Every fence post exactly 4 feet apart, every gate oiled weekly whether it needed it or not. Every horse trained to respond to the smallest signal, every cow accounted for by number and birthmark. The town respected him the way you respect a mountain, distant, unmovable, indifferent to your existence. The women of Harmon Creek had tried, of course. In those early years, there'd been casseroles left on his porch, invitations to Sunday dinners, carefully orchestrated encounters at the general store. Mary Beth Winters, the banker's daughter, had made a show of needing riding lessons. Sarah Holt, who ran the boarding house, had invented a broken fence that needed mending. Even Widow Crawford, who was 50 if she was a day, had suggested he might want company through the winter months. Cole had thanked them all with perfect politeness and perfect disinterest. He didn't mock, didn't encourage, didn't explain. He simply didn't engage. After a while, the casseroles stopped coming. The invitations dried up. The women of Harmon Creek learned what the men already knew. Cole Maddox was a locked door, and he'd thrown away the key. "Man's got ice water in his veins," Tom Brennan liked to say. Tom ran the saloon and considered himself an expert on human nature, mostly because he sold the liquid that revealed it. 15 years I've known him. Never seen him drunk, never seen him laugh, never seen him lose his temper. Hell, I've never even seen him smile. "Maybe he's got nothing to smile about," his wife Martha would reply, wiping down the bar with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd heard this conversation 1,000 times. "Everyone's got something. Man works that hard, builds that much. He's got to want something out of it. Maybe he's already got what he wants. Ever think of that?" Tom would grunt, unconvinced, and pour another drink. But Martha was closer to the truth than she knew. Cole did have what he wanted. Control over every aspect of his existence. A life where nothing unexpected could touch him, where every variable was measured and managed. He'd learned the hard way that the things you couldn't control were the things that destroyed you. Love destroyed you, trust destroyed you, hope destroyed you. So he'd built a life without them. The ranch house reflected this philosophy. Sparse, functional, clean. One room for sleeping, one for living, one for the necessities of cooking and washing. No photographs on the walls, no letters tucked in drawers. No mementos of a past he'd left buried somewhere behind him. Every morning, Cole woke at 4:30. Not because an alarm roused him, but because his body had learned the rhythm 15 years ago and never forgotten. He dressed in the dark, pants, shirt, boots, all within arm's reach exactly where he'd left them. By 5, he was checking the stock. By 6, feeding. By 7, he was working whatever task the season demanded: mending fence, breaking horses, clearing irrigation channels, doctoring sick cattle. He stopped for meals only when his body demanded it, eating simple food that required no thought: bread, cheese, dried meat, whatever vegetables he could coax from his stubborn garden. He didn't taste it. Food was fuel, nothing more. At night he read by lamplight, practical books on animal husbandry, weather patterns, soil management, never novels, never poetry, nothing that might require him to feel something beyond the immediate demands of survival and success. It was a half-life, and somewhere deep down, Cole knew it. But a half-life was better than the alternative. A half-life couldn't betray you. A half-life couldn't be ripped away while you slept. The town had long since given up trying to understand him. Cole Maddox was simply part of the landscape now, like the mountains or the river, permanent, unchangeable, alone. And then Mara Ellison arrived. It was late October when she came to Harmon Creek, driving a wagon loaded with enough supplies to suggest she wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. She pulled up to the land office, climbed down without waiting for assistance, and walked inside with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and expected to get it. Henry Walcott, who'd been running the land office since before most people could remember, looked up from his ledger to find a woman standing across his desk. Not a girl, a woman. Somewhere in her late 20s, with sun-weathered skin and hands that bore the calluses of real work. She wore practical traveling clothes, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid that suggested she had no patience for ornament. "Help you, miss?" "Mrs.?" she corrected, though her hand bore no ring. "Mara Ellison. I'm here to claim the Harper property." Henry blinked. The Harper property, 50 acres of decent bottomland along the creek, had been sitting vacant for 2 years, ever since old Jack Harper had died without heirs. It was good land, but working it alone would be hard for a man. For a woman, "Ma'am, I'm not sure you understand what you're taking on. That land needs a lot of work, and I've seen it." Her voice was level, unargued, final. "I rode out last week. The soil's good, the water's reliable, and the cabin needs a new roof and some weatherproofing, but the bones are solid. I can handle it. It's just a woman, alone out there." "Mr. Walcott." She leaned forward slightly, her gray eyes meeting his with absolute clarity. "I have cash money for the first year's claim fee. I have tools, seed, and enough supplies to get through winter. I have a strong back and experience with hard work. What I don't have is time to debate my capabilities with every man who thinks he knows better. Now, do you want my money or not?" Henry opened his mouth, closed it, and reached for the deed papers. News of Mara Ellison spread through Harmon Creek like wildfire through dry grass. A woman, alone, claiming land, planning to work it herself. The responses were predictable. The men of the town fell into 2 camps: those who thought she was foolish and would be gone by spring, and those who thought she was foolish but admired her courage. The women were more divided. Some saw her as an affront to propriety. Others saw her as something more interesting, a possibility. Cole heard about her the way he heard about everything in Harmon Creek, from a distance, with mild disinterest, while conducting necessary business in town. He was at the feed store arranging delivery of winter hay when Tom Brennan came in, already full of the story. "You hear about the new claim?" Tom asked anyone who'd listen. "Woman came in today, bought the Harper place, says she's going to work it herself." The feed store owner, Pete Garson, shook his head. "Won't last. First hard freeze, she'll be on the stage back to wherever she came from." "I don't know," Tom said thoughtfully. "Martha met her at the Mercantile. Said she's got a look about her, not soft." "They're all soft," Pete replied. "Just some hide it better." Cole finished his transaction, collected his receipt, and left without comment. A woman claiming land was unusual, but not unheard of. Plenty of widows worked property, and the territory had no law against it. If she failed, someone else would claim it. If she succeeded, good for her. Either way, it was none of his concern. He rode home thinking about the fence line he needed to finish before the ground froze, not about gray eyes and a voice that didn't ask permission. Mara Ellison spent her first week in Harmon Creek making the Harper cabin habitable. She patched the roof with tar paper and spare shingles, stuffed gaps in the walls with mud and straw, replaced the broken window glass, and scrubbed 15 years of neglect off every surface. She worked from first light to full dark, stopping only for water and the quick cold meals she ate standing up. People rode by sometimes, slowing their horses to stare. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just kept working. If they wanted to help, they could climb down and pick up a hammer. None of them did. By the second week, she'd moved on to the land itself. The Harper property had good bones, creek access, southern exposure, enough flat ground for crops, and enough slope for drainage. But Jack Harper had let it go in his final years, and 2 years of abandonment hadn't helped. Fences sagged. The small barn listed to one side like a drunk. The fields were overgrown with thistle and wild grass. Mara walked every acre, making notes in a small leather journal, planning her work with the same systematic precision Cole would have recognized if he'd been there to see it. She divided the property into sections, prioritizing by necessity. First, shelter for herself and her 2 horses. Second, water access secured before freeze. Third, repairs to outbuildings. Fourth, field preparation for spring planting. She didn't hope for help, didn't expect it. In her experience, the only person you could truly rely on was yourself. It was the middle of the 3rd week when she and Cole first crossed paths. Mara was working on the fence line that divided her property from the open range to the north. Several posts had rotted through, and she was replacing them one by one, digging out the old post, sinking a new one, tamping the earth tight, stringing fresh wire. It was slow, back-breaking work, made harder by ground that was starting to freeze at night. She had just lifted a new post into position when she heard the horse approaching. She looked up to see a rider on a big bay gelding, sitting easy in the saddle despite the animal's clear quality and spirit. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that might have been handsome if it ever showed an expression. He pulled up about 10 feet away, studying her work with the same attention most men gave to livestock they were considering purchasing. Mara waited. She didn't bristle or preen, didn't smile or frown, just waited. "You're putting those posts too shallow," the man said finally. His voice was deep, flat, empty of inflection. Mara glanced at the hole she'd dug. A good 3 feet, same as all the others. They're standard depth. Standard for summer. Winter frost will heave them out in a month. You need 4 feet, minimum. She looked at him more carefully. This wasn't idle criticism. He knew what he was talking about. "You speak from experience?" "I speak from having replaced every fence post on my property twice before I learned better." "And you are?" "Cole Maddox. My land runs east of here." So this was the famous Cole Maddox, the hermit rancher, the man no one could touch. Mara had heard the stories in town, most of them whispered with a mix of respect and puzzlement, as if the speakers couldn't quite decide whether Cole was admirable or pitiable. Looking at him now, Mara saw what they meant. There was something absent in his face, some essential warmth that most people carried even when they were angry or sad. Cole Maddox looked like a man carved from stone, functional, durable, and utterly without softness. "Mara Ellison," she said, "and I appreciate the advice." She didn't say thank you, didn't ask for further instruction, just acknowledged his expertise and waited to see if he'd say more or ride on. Cole studied her for a moment longer. Most women would have engaged by now, asked questions, sought approval, tried to extend the conversation into something social. This one just stood there, one hand still on the fence post, waiting for him to finish his business and leave. "You'll want to brace those corner posts," he said, "and use barbed wire, not smooth. Cattle will push through smooth wire." "I'm not planning to run cattle." "Your neighbors are. If your fence can't hold, you'll be chasing strays all spring." Mara considered this, then nodded. "Fair point." Another silence. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of coming snow. Cole's horse shifted, ready to move on. "You'll need help getting through winter," Cole said. It wasn't an offer, just an observation. "No," Mara replied calmly, "I won't." Something flickered in Cole's eyes, surprise maybe, or recognition. "This land will break you if you work it alone." "Then it'll break me. But it'll be my choice." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Cole felt something almost like curiosity. This woman wasn't posturing, wasn't trying to prove anything to him or anyone else. She simply stated her intention as plainly as she might state the color of the sky. "Good luck," he said, and he almost meant it. "I don't believe in luck," Mara replied, "but I appreciate the sentiment." Cole turned his horse and rode away, and Mara went back to work. Neither of them smiled. Neither looked back. But something had shifted in the air between them, subtle as a change in wind direction. In town, the betting had already started. Pete Garson gave Mara until Christmas. Tom Brennan said she'd make it to New Year's. Only Martha Brennan, watching her husband count coins with the other men, refused to bet. "Why not?" Tom asked. "Easy money." "Because I've seen her eyes," Martha said quietly, "and I've seen his, and I don't think either of them knows what's about to happen." "What's that supposed to mean?" But Martha just shook her head and went back to wiping the bar, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. November came hard to Harmon Creek. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 2 days, and the first real snow arrived on the heels of a north wind that cut through wool like it was paper. The men of the town battened down for winter, securing their homes and businesses, laying in supplies, and settling into the long, slow wait for spring. Mara worked through it all. She finished the fence repairs, weatherproofed the barn, and laid in enough firewood to see her through to March. She bought supplies in town with the same systematic efficiency she applied to everything else. Flour, salt, coffee, beans, dried meat. No luxuries, no extras, just the raw materials for survival. The townspeople watched her come and go, and their opinions began to shift. She wasn't running, wasn't quitting, wasn't asking for rescue. She just kept working. Cole saw her twice more before winter truly set in. Once at the feed store, where she was loading her wagon with the same careful attention he brought to his own purchasing. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Neither spoke. The second time was at the creek that divided their properties. He'd ridden out to check the water level, always lower in winter, but you needed to know how much lower to plan for stock needs. Mara was there on foot, doing the same thing, a notebook in her gloved hands. "Water's running about 60% of summer flow," Cole said, not sure why he felt compelled to share the information. Mara looked up, unsurprised by his presence. "I measured 70%, but I might be off." "Where'd you measure?" She pointed upstream. "Above the bend." "Flows faster there. Better to measure below, where it slows." She considered this, then walked downstream to where he stood. They measured together, silent and efficient, and confirmed 62%. "Thank you," Mara said, noting it in her book. "You calculate well?" Cole asked. "Well enough. I can figure what I need." He should have left then, should have mounted his horse and ridden home to the work waiting there. But instead he asked, "You worked land before?" "Kansas. My husband and I had a farm." She said it matter-of-factly, the way you'd mentioned the weather. "He died 3 years ago. Fever." "I'm sorry." "So was I." She closed her notebook. "But sorry doesn't plant crops or mend fences. So I sold what I could, packed what I needed, and came here." "Why here?" "Why not?" She met his eyes. "Every place is hard. Might as well choose your own hard." Something in Cole's chest tightened. He recognized the philosophy because it was his own, though he'd never heard it spoken aloud. "You'll want to check your roof after heavy snow," he said. "Weight can collapse a structure faster than you'd think." "Already planning to. I've got a ladder and a shovel set aside." "Good." They stood there a moment longer, two solitary figures against a gray November sky, and then Cole mounted his horse and rode away without another word. Mara watched him go, noting the perfect posture, the easy control, the absolute self-containment. Most men rode like they were part of the horse. Cole Maddox rode like he was part of nothing but himself. She understood that too. December brought the deep cold, the kind that made your breath freeze and your fingers go numb even inside gloves. Harmon Creek pulled into itself like a hibernating animal. Smoke rose from chimneys, lights glowed in windows, families gathered around fires and waited for spring. Mara kept to her routine, morning chores, repairs, planning for spring planting. She didn't mind the isolation, had never minded it really. People were complicated, messy, unpredictable. Work was simple. Work was honest. Work didn't disappoint you. But sometimes, in the evenings, she found herself thinking about Cole Maddox. Not in the way the town women had thought about him. She had no interest in softening him or changing him or drawing him out. She thought about him the way you think about a puzzle. Here was a man who'd built exactly the life he wanted and defended it with absolute consistency. Why? What had taught him that control was more important than connection? She recognized it because she'd learned similar lessons, though her path had been different. Her husband Thomas had been a good man, kind, steady, reliable. And then he'd died. And she'd learned that none of those qualities could save you when chance decided otherwise. You could build a life with someone, plan a future, work toward shared dreams, and then fever could take it all in 3 days. After that, building alone made sense. If the only person you relied on was yourself, you couldn't be destroyed by someone else's absence. But Cole's isolation seemed older, deeper. He hadn't learned caution from loss. He'd learned it from something worse. Betrayal, maybe. Or violence. Something that had taught him that other people were threats, not possibilities. Mara shook her head, pulling herself back to the present. It didn't matter. Cole Maddox's past was his own business, and she had enough to manage without borrowing other people's ghosts. She added another log to the fire, opened her planning journal, and got back to work. Cole, for his part, found himself thinking about Mara more often than was comfortable or logical. He told himself it was natural curiosity. She was his neighbor, after all, and her success or failure could affect his property values. But that was a lie. And somewhere beneath the layers of control and routine, he knew it. What disturbed him wasn't attraction. He'd learned to ignore that particular inconvenience years ago. What disturbed him was recognition. Mara Ellison operated by the same principles he did: self-sufficiency, discipline, emotional distance. She didn't need people, didn't want rescue, didn't soften the world with false hope or sentiment, and she was completely alone with it. Seeing his own philosophy reflected in someone else should have been validating. Instead, it made him uneasy in ways he couldn't quite name. On a bitter afternoon in mid-December, Cole was in his barn repairing tack when he heard the horse approaching. He knew the sound of every animal in Harmon Creek, occupational necessity when you worked with livestock. This one was unfamiliar, which meant a stranger, or Mara appeared in the barn doorway, leading one of her horses. The animal was favoring its left foreleg, and Mara's face was tight with concern. "I need your help," she said without preamble. "He's thrown a shoe, and I think there's something in the hoof. I've got tools, but I can't hold him steady and work at the same time." Cole set down the bridle he was mending and stood. "Bring him to the light." They worked in silence, Mara holding the horse's head, speaking low and calm, while Cole examined the hoof. She was right. A stone had lodged deep in the frog, and the tissue around it was inflamed. "Going to hurt him to get it out," Cole said, "but it'll hurt worse if we leave it." "I know. Do what you need to do." Cole worked quickly and efficiently, extracting the stone and cleaning the wound. The horse danced and pulled, but Mara held firm, her voice never rising, her hands never wavering. When it was done, Cole straightened. "Keep him off it for a few days. Wrap the hoof tonight. Should heal clean." "Thank you." Mara started to lead the horse out, then paused. "I owe you." "No," Cole said. "You don't." "Yes, I do. That's how debts work." "I don't keep accounts with neighbors." Mara studied him for a long moment. "All right, then thank you, and I'll remember it." She led the horse into the fading afternoon light. Cole watched her go, noting the straight back, the efficient movements, the complete absence of false gratitude or social performance. She was just herself. No more, no less. It was the most honest thing he'd seen in years. Christmas came and went, marked in Harmon Creek by church services and family gatherings. Cole didn't attend. He never did. Mara didn't either, and for once the town gossips had to work harder to find fault. After all, she had no family here, and working land alone didn't leave much time for socializing. The winter deepened. January brought blizzards that lasted for days, winds that piled snow into drifts 15 feet high. Both Cole and Mara retreated into their respective solitudes, working only what was necessary, surviving rather than thriving. But even through the storms, Cole found himself checking the southern ridge, looking for smoke from Mara's chimney. It was there, every day. Steady, reliable. She was still there, still fighting. He told himself it was just neighborly concern, nothing more. He was lying, and he knew it. Something was changing, not in the weather, not in the land, but in him. After 15 years of perfect isolation, of absolute control, something in Cole Maddox was beginning to thaw, and he had no idea how to stop it. February arrived with a false promise of spring. The temperature climbed above freezing for 3 days straight, melting the top layer of snow into treacherous slush that refroze each night into skating rinks of ice. It was the most dangerous time of year, when people got careless, thinking winter had loosened its grip, only to find themselves caught in its final vicious assault. Cole knew better than to trust a warm spell. He'd seen too many ranchers lose stock to late-season storms, too many men break bones on ice they thought had melted. So he worked with the same careful attention he always did, checking each step, testing each surface, trusting nothing. He was hauling feed to the far pasture when he saw the smoke. Not the steady white plume of a working chimney, but thick black clouds rising from the direction of the Harper property. His hands tightened on the reins instinctively, and the bay gelding responded, breaking into a canter before Cole consciously decided to move. The barn was burning, not the whole structure, not yet, but the eastern wall was fully engulfed, flames licking up toward the roof, black smoke pouring out in choking waves. Mara was in the yard with 2 buckets, running between the well and the fire in a pattern that would have been admirable if it hadn't been so obviously futile. Cole pulled up, dismounted in one smooth motion, and grabbed her arm as she ran past. "Stop! Let go!" "It's gone. You can't save it. My tools are in there, my seed for spring, and you'll be in there too if that roof goes. Back away." Mara jerked free, her face streaked with soot and sweat despite the freezing air. "I can get to the west side, pull things out." "No." Cole's voice cut through her desperation like a blade. "Look at the roof." She looked up. The barn's roof was old, dry timber, and the fire was already racing across it like water. Even as they watched, a section collapsed inward with a shower of sparks and a roar like thunder. Mara's shoulders slumped, not in defeat, in recognition. She knew when a fight was lost. "Damn it!" They stood together in the yard, watching the barn burn. There was nothing else to do. The well couldn't produce water fast enough, and even if it could, the structure was too far gone. All they could do was make sure the fire didn't spread to the cabin or the other outbuildings. "What happened?" Cole asked. "Lantern fell, I was moving hay, got careless, knocked it over." Her voice was flat, factual. No excuses. No self-pity. "Tried to catch it, but the oil spread faster than I could move." Cole nodded. He'd seen it happen before. Oil and dry hay. You had maybe 10 seconds before it was out of control. "Anyone hurt?" "Just my pride and my spring planning." "Horses?" "In the paddock. Saw the smoke, got them out first." "Good." They fell silent again. The fire burned itself out over the next hour, consuming everything combustible and leaving behind a skeleton of charred timbers and twisted metal. Mara walked the perimeter once it was safe, salvaging what little remained. A few tools, a water trough, some hardware that might be reusable. Cole watched her work, recognizing the way she compartmentalized the loss. Don't think about what's gone. Focus on what remains. It was the same strategy he used, the same survival mechanism. "You'll need shelter for your animals," he said when she'd finished her inventory. "Can't keep horses in a paddock through what's coming." "I know." Mara stared at the ruins, her jaw tight. "I'll figure something out." "I have space." She turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her features before she could hide it. "What?" "My barn. I've got empty stalls. Your horses can stay there until you rebuild." "I can't. It's not charity. You'll work for it. I need help with spring calving anyway." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Cole had managed spring calving alone for 15 years, but it was also an offer that allowed Mara to accept without compromising her pride, and she was smart enough to recognize it. "All right," she said finally. "Fair trade. When do we start?" "Now. Get your tack. I'll help you move them." They worked together in the fading afternoon light, leading Mara's 2 horses back to Cole's ranch. The animals were skittish from the smoke and fire, but Mara handled them with the same calm competence she brought to everything else, and they settled once they were in the warm, clean stalls Cole had prepared. "Hay's in the loft," Cole said. "Feed them morning and evening. Water's from the pump outside. It's cold, but it won't freeze. Any problems, let me know." "I will, thank you." Cole nodded and turned to go, then paused. "You eaten today?" Mara blinked. "What?" "Food. Have you eaten?" Not since breakfast." "Why?" "Because you're going to need your strength if you're working for me, and you're no good half-starved." He gestured toward the house. "I've got stew. It's nothing fancy, but it's hot. For the first time since he'd met her, Mara looked genuinely uncertain. Not about the offer itself, but about what accepting it might mean. In Harmon Creek, sharing a meal was different from sharing work. It crossed an invisible line from neighbor to something more personal. I don't want to impose, she said carefully. You're not. I made too much anyway. Another lie. He always made exactly enough. But the words were out, and he found he didn't want to take them back. Mara studied him for a long moment, those gray eyes searching his face for something he wasn't sure he wanted her to find. Then she nodded. All right, but just this once. They walked to the house in silence, their boots crunching on frozen ground. Cole opened the door and led her into the single room that served as his kitchen and living space. It was exactly as sparse as she'd expected. A table, 2 chairs, a stove, a few shelves with essential supplies. No decoration, no comfort, just function. But it was clean and warm. And when Cole ladled stew into 2 bowls, the smell made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. They ate without speaking at first. Mara was too hungry, and Cole too unused to conversation during meals. But after the first bowl was empty and Cole refilled it without asking, Mara broke the silence. You always live alone? Cole paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. It was a direct question, the kind most people in Harmon Creek knew better than to ask. But Mara wasn't most people, and she asked it the way she'd asked about fence posts and water flow, as a simple request for information. Not always, he said finally. Long time ago, I had a different life. It didn't work out. You lose someone? I lost everything. The words came out harder than he'd intended, and he forced himself to soften his tone. What about you? You said your husband died, but that's not the whole story. Mara took a slow sip of water. No, it's not. She set the cup down, her fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on its surface. Thomas and I, we built that farm from nothing. 5 years of work, clearing land, planting crops, building a house we planned to fill with children. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then the fever came. 3 days later, he was gone, and I realized I'd built my entire life around someone else's presence. When he died, it felt like the foundations collapsed. So you sold it. So I sold it, couldn't stay there. Everything reminded me of what we'd planned and what I'd never have. I thought, if I started somewhere new, built something for myself alone, maybe I could find solid ground again. Cole understood that better than she knew. And have you? I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. They finished the meal, and Mara helped clean up without being asked, moving around Cole's kitchen with an efficiency that suggested she was used to working in small spaces. When they were done, she pulled on her coat and turned to face him. Thank you, she said, for the barn space, for the meal, for not asking more questions than I wanted to answer. Same to you. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. We're a pair, aren't we? Both running from ghosts, both pretending we chose this isolation instead of having it forced on us. Cole felt something tighten in his chest. I'm not running. Neither am I. But we're both alone for a reason, and I don't think the reason is as noble as we tell ourselves. She opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air. See you in the morning. I'll be here at 6 to feed the horses. You don't have to. I told you I pay my debts. And then she was gone, walking into the darkness with that straight-backed confidence that never wavered. Cole stood in the doorway watching her go, and for the first time in 15 years, his house felt empty instead of peaceful. The next morning, Mara arrived at 5:50, 10 minutes early. Cole was already in the barn, and he heard her footsteps, steady, purposeful, before she appeared. Morning, she said. Morning. They worked side by side, feeding and watering the horses. Mara had brought her own tools, and she handled the work with the same methodical care Cole used, wasting no motion, making no unnecessary conversation. It should have been comfortable. Instead, it was charged with attention neither of them acknowledged. When the morning chores were done, Cole said, I'm riding the northern fence line today, checking for winter damage. You can come if you want to learn the property. I've got my own work. Your barn's ash. Your seed's gone. What work are you going to do that can't wait a few hours? Mara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right, and they both knew it. Fine, but I'm not riding behind you like some helpless town girl. I'll take my own horse. Wouldn't expect anything else. They rode out together as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Cole led them along the fence line, pointing out areas where posts had shifted or wire had come loose. Mara listened, asked occasional questions, and absorbed information with the same focused attention she brought to everything. "You've got a system," she observed after they'd covered the first mile. "Every post numbered, every section mapped. I saw the charts in your barn." "Can't manage what you don't measure." "Is that what you're doing? Managing?" "What else would I be doing?" Mara looked out over the land, her expression thoughtful. "Most people work land because they love it, because they want to build something, leave something behind. You work it like you're trying to control it, like if you can just get everything organized enough, measured enough, planned enough, nothing bad can happen." Cole's hands tightened on the reins. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" She turned to look at him. "I've seen your house, Cole. No pictures. No books except practical manuals. No sign that anyone actually lives there instead of just surviving there. That's not love of the land. That's fear." "I'm not afraid." "Yes, you are. We both are. That's why we're out here, alone, pretending we chose this instead of admitting we're too scared to risk anything else." The words hit like a physical blow. Cole pulled his horse to a stop, and Mara stopped beside him. For a long moment, they sat there in the frozen landscape. Two people who'd spent years building walls suddenly finding themselves on the same side of them. "What happened to you?" Mara asked, her voice gentler now. "What made you this way?" Cole stared out at the horizon, at the endless white expanse that matched the emptiness he'd built inside himself. He'd never told anyone, had sworn he never would, but something about Mara, about her honesty, her refusal to accept comfortable lies, made him want to speak the truth. "I was married," he said finally. "Young, stupid, thought I knew everything about love and trust and building a future." He paused, the old pain rising like bile. "Her name was Catherine. We had a ranch in Montana, smaller than this, but growing. We were planning to expand, talking about children, making all the promises people make when they think the world is good." "What happened?" "My partner happened, a man named James Garrett. I'd known him since we were boys, trusted him with everything. Turns out he and Catherine had been together for almost a year. They'd planned it all. Wait until I'd built the ranch up. Then convinced me to take a loan against it for expansion. Once the loan was secured, they'd disappear together with the money." Mara's face showed nothing, but her voice was tight. "Did they?" "They tried, but I found out 2 days before they were set to leave. Found them together in the barn I'd built with my own hands, counting money that was supposed to buy cattle." His voice went flat, emotionless. "I lost everything. Had to sell the ranch to pay the loan they'd taken. Lost my wife, my best friend, my home, my future. All at once." "What did you do?" "I left. Rode until I couldn't remember what their faces looked like. Ended up here. Built this place from nothing, by myself, owing nothing to anyone. And I swore I'd never trust anyone enough to be destroyed like that again." They sat in silence. A hawk circled overhead, hunting. The wind carried the scent of pine and snow. "I understand," Mara said finally. "More than you know. But Cole, living like this, alone, controlled, safe, it's not living. It's just waiting to die without admitting you're already half dead. Better half dead than destroyed." "Is it?" She turned her horse to face him. "Because from where I'm sitting, you destroyed yourself years ago. You just did it slowly, piece by piece, cutting away everything that made you human until all that's left is this function, this routine. You've become what they couldn't take from you, nothing." Cole felt fury rise hot and sharp. "You don't have the right. I have every right, because I'm doing the same thing." Her eyes blazed with sudden intensity. "I sold my farm, came here, started over, told myself it was about independence, about building something for myself, but it's not. It's about making sure I never care about anything enough to be hurt when I lose it. And you know what? It's working. I'm not hurt anymore. I'm not anything." The fury drained as quickly as it had risen, replaced by something rawer. Recognition. Understanding. "So what do we do?" Cole asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but I think Maybe we start by admitting we're tired. Tired of being alone. Tired of pretending it's what we want. Tired of survival without purpose. She nudged her horse forward and Cole followed. They rode the rest of the fence line in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the isolation they'd both perfected, but something shared. Mutual. Almost companionable. When they returned to the barn, the sun was high and bright. The false spring still holding. Mara dismounted and began unsaddling her horse, her movements practiced and efficient. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Same time." "And Cole?" She looked at him over the saddle. "Thank you for telling me." "Don't thank me yet. I'm still not sure it was the right choice." Maybe that's the point. Maybe the right choices are the ones that scare us. She finished with her horse and walked away, leaving Cole standing in the barn doorway, watching her retreating figure and feeling the first cracks forming in the armor he'd spent 15 years building. The pattern continued for the next 2 weeks. Mara arrived each morning to tend her horses, and afterward she and Cole would work together, checking fence lines, repairing equipment, preparing for spring. They talked more than Cole had talked to anyone in years, conversations that started practical and drifted toward personal. Mara told him about Kansas, about the farm she and Thomas had built, about the dreams they'd shared, and the reality that had never matched them. She spoke without sentimentality, but also without the bitter edge that had characterized her first weeks in Harmon Creek. As if sharing the story with someone who understood made it easier to carry. Cole, in turn, found himself revealing pieces of his past he'd thought buried forever. Small details at first. The ranch in Montana, the work he'd done, the life he'd imagined. Then deeper things. His father's death when he was young, his mother's remarriage to a man who'd seen Cole as competition, the way he'd left at 16 with nothing but determination and a refusal to be broken. "We're both orphans," Mara observed one afternoon. They were in Cole's barn organizing tools for spring planting. "Not just because we lost people, but because we chose to be. We cut ourselves off from everything familiar and started over." "Starting over implies you're building towards something," Cole said. "I was just trying to get away." "And now?" "Now I don't know." He set down the harrow he'd been examining and looked at her. "For 15 years I knew exactly what I wanted. Control, independence, safety. Now you show up and start asking questions, and suddenly none of it feels like enough." "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did. Maybe not consciously, but you came here looking for the same thing I was. Someone who'd understand. Someone who wouldn't try to fix us or save us or make us into something we're not." Mara leaned against the workbench, her arms crossed. "So what does that make us?" "Honest, maybe, for the first time in a long time." The air between them shifted, charged with possibility. Cole took a step closer, and Mara didn't move away. For a moment they stood there, close enough to touch, both recognizing the edge they were approaching and the choice that came with it. Then Mara stepped back. "I should go. I've got work at my place." "Mara, don't." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Not yet. We're both too raw, too new at this. If we rush it, we'll ruin it." Cole wanted to argue, to close the distance and take what they both clearly wanted, but he knew she was right. They were like two wounded animals circling each other, attracted, wary, not quite ready to trust. "Tomorrow then," he said. "Tomorrow." But tomorrow brought something neither of them expected. Cole was in his barn at dawn, as always, when he heard the horse approaching fast. Too fast. He stepped outside to see Tom Brennan from town, his horse lathered and blowing hard. "Cole!" Tom pulled up, breathing almost as hard as his mount. "You seen Mara Ellison?" Ice flooded Cole's veins. "Not since yesterday evening. Why?" "Her cabin's locked up tight. Horses are here in your barn, but she never showed up at the general store this morning. Martha's worried. Woman's been coming in every Thursday, like clockwork, for supplies. And when she didn't show, Martha asked me to ride out and check." Cole was already moving toward the bay gelding. "You check her property?" "Rode by. Cabin looks fine, but I didn't want to go snooping if she was just sleeping late or something." "She doesn't sleep late." Cole swung into the saddle. "Stay here in case she comes back. I'll check the cabin." He rode hard, pushing the gelding faster than was wise on ice-slicked ground. Fear rose in his throat. Irrational, overwhelming fear that something had happened to her, that she was hurt, or worse, that he'd waited too long to admit what he was feeling, and now he'd never get the chance. The cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney. So she was there. But why hadn't she come to feed the horses? Cole dismounted and pounded on the door. "Mara, open up!" Silence. "Mara, if you don't answer, I'm coming in." More silence, then a weak voice. "Door's locked. Keys above the frame." Relief and new fear crashed through him simultaneously. He found the key, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Mara was on the narrow bed in the corner, wrapped in blankets despite the fire burning in the stove. Her face was flushed with fever, her hair matted with sweat. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook. "Just a cold. I'll be up tomorrow." Cole crossed the room in 3 strides and pressed his hand to her forehead. She was burning up. "How long have you been like this?" "Couple days. It'll pass." "Like hell it will. You're sick, really sick." He looked around the cabin, taking in the empty water bucket, the untouched food on the table. "Have you been eating? Drinking?" "Can't keep anything down." Cole cursed under his breath. Fever, dehydration, alone in a cabin with no one to check on her. This was how people died in the frontier, not from the sickness itself, but from the isolation that came with it. "I'm taking you to my place," he said. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. You can't take care of yourself like this, and I'm not leaving you here to get worse." He started gathering her things, clothes, her journal, basic necessities. "Cole, I can manage." "No." He turned to face her, and something in his expression silenced her protests. "You were right the other day. We're both tired of being alone. Well, right now you're sick, and you need help, and I'm damn well going to give it to you. You can argue with me when you're strong enough to win." Mara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded weakly. "All right, but just until the fever breaks." "Just until the fever breaks," Cole agreed, knowing it was a lie they both wanted to believe. He carried her to his horse. She weighed less than he'd expected, all wiry muscle and determination, and rode back to his ranch with Mara bundled against his chest. She was unconscious by the time they arrived, her body finally giving in to the illness it had been fighting for days. Cole settled her in his own bed, the only real bed in the house, and set about the work of nursing. Cool cloths for the fever, water, 1 spoonful at a time, broth when she could keep it down. He worked with the same systematic attention he brought to everything else, but there was nothing mechanical about it now. Every time her breathing changed, his heart stuttered. Every time she shivered, he added another blanket. Tom Brennan had followed him back to the ranch, and Cole sent him to town for medicine and to let Martha know Mara was being cared for. The old saloon keeper looked at Cole with new eyes, seeing something in his face that hadn't been there before. "You care about her," Tom said. It wasn't a question. "Just being neighborly," Cole replied. "Sure you are." Tom mounted his horse. "I'll be back with the medicine. Try not to let her die while I'm gone. Martha would never forgive you." Cole sat by Mara's bedside through the afternoon and into the evening, watching her fight the fever. Sometimes she was lucid, sometimes delirious. Once she called out for Thomas. Once she wept without waking. And once, in a moment of painful clarity, she looked at Cole and whispered, "Don't leave me." "I won't," he promised. "I'm right here." "Everyone leaves." "Not me, not this time. This." She fell back asleep, and Cole continued his vigil, realizing with absolute certainty that something fundamental had changed. He'd spent 15 years building walls to keep people out, keep himself safe, keep the pain of connection at bay. And now, in the space of a few months, this woman had walked into his life and demolished every defense without even trying. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt something close to relief, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. The fever broke on the 3rd day. Mara woke clear-eyed and weak, looking around Cole's bedroom with confusion until memory returned. "You stayed," she said. "I told you I would." "People say a lot of things." "I'm not people." A smile ghosted across her pale face. "No, you're not." She was too weak to argue about staying, too exhausted to maintain her walls. So she let Cole care for her, let him bring her food and water, let him help her when she needed it. And slowly, as her strength returned, something new grew between them. Not just attraction or understanding, but partnership. Trust. A week after the fever broke, Mara was sitting at Cole's table, still pale but recovering, when she said, "I've been thinking." About? About what you said. About being tired of survival without purpose. She looked up at him. "I don't want to go back to my cabin and live alone again. And I don't think you want me to." Cole's heart hammered against his ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we try something different. Not marriage. Neither of us is ready for that. But partnership. Real partnership. We work the land together, combine resources, build something that's ours instead of just mine or yours." "And when it fails?" The question came automatically, defense mechanisms still firing even as hope rose in his chest. "Then it fails. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have chosen to risk something instead of hiding from it." Cole looked at this woman who'd crashed into his life like a force of nature, who challenged everything he believed about safety and control, who'd somehow seen past his defenses to the scared, lonely man underneath. And he made the first truly brave choice he'd made in 15 years. "All right," he said, "let's try." The decision hung between them like morning mist, visible, tangible, but fragile enough that one wrong move could make it disappear. Cole stood at the window of his cabin, watching the late winter sun paint the snow in shades of amber and rose, while Mara sat at his table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. "We should write it down," she said finally. "Make it official. What we're agreeing to, what we're not. No assumptions, no unspoken expectations." Cole turned from the window, a ghost of approval in his eyes. This was why they might actually work. Neither of them dealt in romantic illusions or vague promises. They understood that good intentions weren't enough. You needed structure, clarity, terms both parties could live with. "All right," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. "Let's start with the basics. Your land or mine?" "Both. We keep both properties, work them as a single operation. Legally separate for now, but functionally united." Cole nodded slowly. "Makes sense. Your land has better water access and southern exposure. Mine has better grazing and established infrastructure. Together, we've got a real operation." "Finances?" Mara asked. "Separate accounts, shared expenses. We split costs for anything that benefits both properties. Feed, equipment, hired help if we need it. Individual earnings from individual sales stay individual until we decide otherwise. And the work? Equal partnership. We plan together, decide together, work together. No one gives orders. We discuss. We compromise. We commit." Mara studied him, looking for the catch, the hidden clause where he'd try to maintain control. But Cole's face was open as it ever got, and she saw only honesty there. "What about living arrangements?" she asked carefully. This was the delicate part, the place where pragmatism met something more complicated. Cole was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with the care most people reserve for handling explosives. "You keep your cabin once it's habitable again. Use it when you need space, privacy, time alone. But you're welcome here anytime. Doors always open." He paused. "And if someday you want to stay, that's welcome too." It was more vulnerability than Cole had shown in 15 years, and they both knew it. Mara felt something warm and painful expand in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The permission to let it grow. "Same to you," she said quietly. "My door, my space, my life. You're welcome in it, when you're ready." They spent the next hour hammering out details, writing everything down in Mara's precise hand. Division of labor, decision-making protocols. What happened if one of them wanted out? What happened if one of them got hurt or sick? What happened if the partnership failed? It should have been cold, transactional, the opposite of romance. Instead, it felt like the most intimate thing either of them had ever done. Two damaged people carefully building something new from the wreckage of their pasts, brick by cautious brick. When they finished, Mara read through the document one last time, then pushed it across the table. "We should both sign it." "It's not legally binding," Cole pointed out. "No, but it's binding to us. That's what matters." They signed their names at the bottom, and something fundamental shifted. They were partners now. Not married, not even courting by the town standards, but committed to something real nonetheless. The town, predictably, had opinions. Martha Brennan was delighted. About time someone got through to that man. 15 years he's been a hermit, and here comes Mara Ellison, and suddenly he's nursing her through fever and talking partnership. You mark my words, there'll be a wedding before summer. Don't count on it, her husband Tom replied. Those two are about as romantic as fence posts. More likely they'll just work themselves to death side by side and call it companionship. There's more than one kind of love, Tom Brennan, and sometimes the quiet kind is the strongest. The women of Harmon Creek, who'd long since given up on Cole, viewed Mara with a mixture of resentment and respect. She'd done what they couldn't, not by being softer or prettier or more accommodating, but by being exactly as hard and independent as he was. She didn't chase him, Sarah Holt observed to Mary Beth Winters as they watched Mara load supplies at the general store. That's the difference. She just lived her life and he came to her. Still don't understand what she sees in him, Mary Beth sniffed. Man's got all the warmth of a January morning. Maybe she doesn't need warmth. Maybe she needs someone who understands what it's like to be cold. The men were more practical in their assessment. Pete Garson, watching Cole and Mara work together to load fence posts, said to anyone who'd listen, "Good match, those two. Both stubborn as mules, both know their way around hard work. They'll either build an empire or kill each other. Even odds which." But the person who understood best was Henry Walcott from the land office. He'd been the first person Mara had dealt with in Harmon Creek, and he'd watched both of them over the years. When asked his opinion, he simply said, "Sometimes the loneliest people find each other not because they're looking for completion, but because they recognize the same scars. Those two know what it costs to survive alone. Now they're learning what it might cost to survive together." The partnership began in earnest as February melted into March. The false spring that had seemed so promising turned vicious, as Cole had known it would. A late-season blizzard swept down from the north, bringing winds that cut like knives and temperatures that dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Cole and Mara had been working on the fence line between their properties when the storm hit. They'd seen it coming, the green-yellow sky to the north, the sudden stillness, the way the animals had started moving toward shelter without prompting. They'd had maybe 20 minutes to prepare. "Your place or mine?" Mara shouted over the rising wind. "Mine's closer. Move!" They rode hard, racing the storm, reaching Cole's barn just as the first wave of snow hit like a solid wall. Inside, they worked together without discussion, unsaddling horses, checking supplies, making sure the animals were secured. By the time they'd finished, the world outside had disappeared into white chaos. Cole led the way to the house, one hand on the guide rope he'd strung from barn to cabin years ago for exactly this situation. The rope was already coated with ice, and the wind tried to rip them from their feet with every step. But they made it, stumbling through the door into the cabin's relative warmth. "How long?" Mara asked, shaking snow from her coat. "Could be 3 days, could be a week." Cole was already moving, checking supplies with automatic efficiency. "I've got enough food and firewood for 2 weeks if we're careful. Water won't be an issue. We can melt snow. Main thing is keeping the fire going and not letting the cold get inside." They fell into a rhythm born of necessity. Cole tended the fire and managed the food supplies. Mara organized their space, creating separate sleeping areas and work zones so they wouldn't drive each other crazy in the small cabin. Every few hours, one of them would brave the guide rope to check on the animals in the barn. By the second day, the storm showed no signs of letting up. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closer. Cole and Mara moved around each other with careful politeness, both aware that proximity could either bind them closer or drive them apart. It was Mara who broke first. She was standing at the window staring out at the endless white when she said, "Tell me about Montana. About before." Cole looked up from the harness he was repairing. "Why?" "Because we're stuck here, and talking is better than silence. And because if we're partners, I should know more about you than just the man you've become. I should know the man you were." Cole set down the harness. He could refuse, could deflect, could retreat into the silence that had protected him for so long. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the one he'd been carrying inside for 15 years, and suddenly he was tired of bearing it alone. "I was 22 when I met Catherine," he began, his voice low. "Working as a ranch hand for a man named Douglas Harper. Catherine was his daughter, beautiful, educated, everything I wasn't. But she saw something in me, or so I thought. We courted for a year, married the next spring." "You loved her," Mara said. It wasn't a question. I worshipped her, thought the sun rose and set by her word. When she said she wanted to leave her father's ranch and build something of our own, I worked 3 jobs to make it happen. When she said we needed a partner to expand, I brought in James Garrett, my oldest friend. And they betrayed you together. They planned it together. For almost a year, while I was working myself half to death to build our dream, they were planning to take it all and disappear. Cole's hands clenched. The worst part wasn't the money or even losing the ranch. It was knowing that every time Catherine said she loved me, every time James called me brother, they were laughing inside. I was a mark, a useful fool. What happened when you found out? Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with old rage. I found them in the barn. Found them with the money, with the tickets to California, with letters to each other that made it clear this had never been about anything but using me. I confronted them. James tried to act like it was nothing personal, just business. Catherine, she just looked at me like I was stupid for not seeing it coming. Did you hurt them? No, I wanted to. I stood there with my hand shaking, wanting to break James's face, wanting to make Catherine feel even a fraction of what she'd done to me. But I didn't, because if I'd touched them, I'd have become what they already thought I was, violent, uncontrolled, less than human. So I walked away. Let them have the money. Let them go to California. And I took what was left and came here to build something they could never touch. Mara crossed to where he sat and lowered herself into the chair across from him. And you succeeded. You built an empire. You became untouchable. I became alone. So did I. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. Thomas didn't betray me, not the way Catherine betrayed you. But he left me just the same. And I learned the same lesson you did, that love, trust, partnership, all of it can be ripped away in an instant, and you have to be strong enough to survive it. So we both built walls. And now we're trying to tear them down, brick by brick. She pulled her hand back. It's terrifying. Yes, Cole agreed. It is. They sat in silence, the storm howling outside, the fire crackling between them. And slowly, without either of them consciously deciding to do it, they began to talk. Really talk. Not about work or weather or practical matters, but about the things that mattered. Their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, the small moments of beauty they'd witnessed over the years and had no one to share them with. Mara told him about growing up in a strict household where emotion was weakness and independence was survival. About her mother, who'd died young, and her father, who'd raised her like a son because he had no use for daughters. About how she'd married Thomas partially for love, but also for escape, and how his death had felt like punishment for not loving him quite enough. Cole told her about his father's accident when he was 14, how he'd watched him die slowly over 3 days because the nearest doctor was too far away. About his mother's desperate remarriage to a man who saw Cole as competition and treated him accordingly. About learning to fight, to hide, to make himself useful enough to keep but invisible enough to avoid notice. We're both survivors, Mara said, as dawn began to gray the windows on the 3rd day. The storm had finally started to break. But there's a difference between surviving and living. And which are we doing now? I don't know yet. Ask me when the storm's over. But when the storm did finally clear, revealing a world transformed by snow and ice, neither of them had an answer. They emerged from the cabin together, squinting in the sudden brightness, and set about the work of digging out. The drifts were massive, 8-10 feet in places, and it took 2 full days of constant effort to clear paths to the barn, the well, the necessary outbuildings. They worked side by side, falling into a rhythm that felt almost choreographed. Cole would break through the hard crust on top of the drifts. Mara would shovel out the loose snow underneath. When one tired, the other took over. When they stopped for meals, they ate together, planning the next phase of work between bites. The town was slower to dig out. Roads were impassable for a week, and when they finally cleared enough for travel, people emerged to find that the late storm had taken its toll. Several families had lost livestock. 2 roofs had collapsed under the weight of wet snow. An old widow Crawford, who lived alone on the edge of town, had barely survived when her firewood ran out on the 5th day. But Cole's ranch was fine. The barn stood solid. The animals were healthy. The house had weathered the storm without damage. And when people asked how he'd managed so well alone, Cole looked at Mara and said simply, "I wasn't alone." The news spread faster than the storm had. Cole Maddox and Mara Ellison holed up together for a week, unmarried, unchaperoned. The scandal should have been immediate and intense. Instead, people just nodded. Of course they'd weathered it together. Of course they'd both come through fine. What else would you expect from two people who'd made survival an art form? April arrived with the slow, grudging warmth that characterized spring in the high country. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing ground that was half mud, half ice. It was the messiest, most difficult time of year, too cold for planting, too warm for winter work, everything in a state of half-frozen transition. Cole and Mara used the time to plan. They sat at Cole's table every evening, mapping out the coming season with the precision of generals planning a campaign, which fields would be planted with what crops, where they'd run cattle, how they'd manage irrigation, what equipment they'd need to purchase together. It should have been dry, practical work, but increasingly, their planning sessions turned into something else. Conversations that started with crop rotation would drift into childhood memories. Discussions about cattle breeds would segue into philosophy, ethics, the nature of trust. And slowly, carefully, they began to touch. Not romantically, neither was ready for that, but small gestures of comfort and connection. Mara's hand on Cole's shoulder when he was frustrated, Cole steadying Mara when she stumbled in the mud. Casual contact that would have meant nothing between other people but meant everything to two people who'd spent years avoiding human touch. The first real test of their partnership came in late April, when a letter arrived for Cole. It was forwarded through 3 different post offices, the envelope battered and stained, and it bore a return address from California. Cole stared at it for a full minute before opening it, his face going pale and tight. Mara was in the barn when he found her, her hands full of tack she was oiling. She took one look at his expression and set everything down. What happened? Cole handed her the letter without a word. Mara read it quickly, her own expression darkening with each line. The letter was from James Garrett, the man who'd betrayed Cole all those years ago, the man who'd stolen his wife, his money, his future, and now he was asking for help. The California venture had failed, the letter explained. Catherine had left him for someone with more money. He'd lost everything in a bad investment and was now destitute. He'd heard through old connections that Cole had built a successful ranch in the territories, and he was writing to beg, for a loan. Just enough to get back on his feet. He'd pay it back, he swore, with interest. He has a lot of nerve, Mara said, her voice flat with anger. He always did. Cole took the letter back, staring at the familiar handwriting. I should burn this. Forget I ever got it. Should you? Cole looked at her sharply. You think I should help him, after what he did? No, I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night. But that's not the same as ignoring it. Mara leaned against the workbench. This is about more than money, isn't it? It's about the past coming back. About whether you're still the man who walked away from Montana or whether you've become someone different. I don't know who I am anymore, Cole admitted. For 15 years I knew exactly who I was. The man who trusted no one, needed nothing, owed nothing to anyone. Now you're here, and we're partners, and I'm starting to care about things again, and this letter shows up like a test. Then what does the test ask? Cole was quiet for a long moment. It asks whether I'm strong enough to let go, whether I can forgive not because he deserves it, but because I deserve to stop carrying this rage. And are you? I don't know. They stood together in the barn, surrounded by the tools of their trade, while the weight of 15-year-old betrayal hung between them like smoke. Finally, Mara said, Whatever you decide, I'm with you. If you want to help him, we'll help him. If you want to burn the letter and never think about it again, we'll do that. If you want to write back and tell him exactly what you think of him, I'll help you find the words. But you don't have to decide right now, and you don't have to decide alone. Something in Cole's chest loosened. You'd really support whatever I choose? That's what partners do. I might have opinions, and I do, believe me. But this is your past, your decision. I'll stand beside you either way. Cole looked at this woman who'd somehow become essential to his existence in the space of a few months. This woman who understood survival in solitude and the slow, painful work of learning to trust again. And he realized that whatever he decided about James Garrett, the real test wasn't about the past. It was about the future. About whether he could build something new without letting old wounds poison it. I need time to think, he said finally. Take all the time you need. But time, as it turned out, was something they didn't have much of. The spring rains started 2 days later. Not the gentle showers that nourish crops, but torrential downpours that turned the ground to soup and the creek into a roaring monster. Within a week, the water had risen 6 feet above its normal level, threatening both properties. Cole and Mara worked around the clock, building emergency levees, moving stock to higher ground, reinforcing structures that looked likely to flood. They were exhausted, mud-covered, running on coffee and determination. On the 5th day of rain, the creek jumped its banks. Mara was checking the livestock in her paddock when she heard the roar. She turned to see a wall of water surging toward her, carrying debris, moving faster than she could run. She had maybe 10 seconds to act. She sprinted for the fence line, knowing she wouldn't make it, knowing the water would catch her before she reached safety. But then Cole was there, mounted on the bay gelding, reaching down with one strong arm. "Grab on!" Mara jumped, caught his arm, felt herself hauled up behind him as the horse surged forward. The water hit them a second later, nearly knocking them sideways, but the gelding fought for footing and Cole's hands were iron on the reins. They made it to higher ground with seconds to spare, watching as the surge swept through Mara's lower fields, carrying away fence posts and equipment and a season's worth of careful preparation. Mara slid off the horse, breathing hard, staring at the destruction. That's it then. Everything I had stored in the lower barn, seed, tools, supplies, all gone. Cole dismounted beside her, his own breathing ragged. "We'll rebuild." "With what? I don't have the capital to replace all that. I was counting on this season's crops to—" She stopped, choking on the words. "We're partners," Cole said firmly. "My resources are your resources. We'll use my seed, my equipment, replant on my land if we have to. You're not alone in this. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering. That's the whole point of partnership. We share the good and the bad." He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. 15 years ago, I lost everything because 2 people I trusted betrayed me, and I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt me like that again. But you know what? Being alone hurts too. It's a slower hurt, a quieter one, but it still destroys you. Cole, I'm not finished. When that water was coming at you, do you know what I felt? Terror. Absolute, overwhelming terror that I was going to lose you before I ever told you how much you've changed my life. Before I admitted that somewhere in the last few months, you stopped being just my partner and became the reason I wake up in the morning. The reason I want to build something instead of just survive. Mara stared at him. This man who'd been frozen for so long, now standing in the rain declaring things he'd probably never said to anyone. "You don't mean that." "Yes, I do. And I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of going back to the way I was. Alone. Safe. Half dead." He pulled her closer. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone without being terrified they'll destroy me. But I want to try. With you." The rain poured down around them, and Mara felt everything she'd been holding back rise up like floodwater. Fear and hope and longing and trust all mixed together until she couldn't tell where one ended and another began. "I don't know how either," she whispered. "Thomas was easy, safe. I loved him, but I never risked everything for him. With you, it feels like if I open that door, there's no closing it again. If this fails, if you leave or I leave, or life just tears us apart, I don't know if I'll survive it. Then we don't leave, we stay, we fight. We choose each other every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Cole's voice was rough with emotion. "I spent 15 years running from connection because I thought it made me weak. But you've shown me that real strength isn't about being alone. It's about being brave enough to need someone." Mara looked into his eyes and saw everything she felt reflected back. The fear, the hope, the desperate desire to believe that this time, this person, might be different. Might be forever. "All right," she said finally. "We try. We risk it. We build something together and hope to hell we're strong enough to keep it." Cole pulled her close, and they stood together in the pouring rain while the floodwaters raged around them, 2 people who'd survived alone learning what it meant to survive together. When they finally made it back to Cole's cabin, soaked and exhausted, they found another letter waiting. This one was from the bank in the nearest town, and it contained news that made the flood damage seem almost trivial by comparison. Someone had filed a claim against Cole's property. An old debt from Montana, supposedly unpaid, with interest compounded over 15 years. The amount was staggering, more than the ranch was worth, more than Cole could possibly pay. And the signature on the claim was James Garrett's. Cole read the letter twice, his face going white, then red, then white again. When he finally looked up at Mara, his eyes were filled with a rage she'd never seen before. He planned this, Cole said, his voice shaking. The begging letter, the sob story. It was all to see if I'd respond, and when I didn't, he went for blood. He wants to take everything I've built. Can he? Is the debt real? It might be. When I left Montana, there was confusion about who owed what. The ranch was in both our names, mine and Catherine's. Some of the debts might have been jointly held. If he can prove I was responsible, Cole's hands clenched. He can take it all, the ranch, the land, everything. Mara took the letter from him, reading it carefully. We need a lawyer, someone who can fight this. With what money? Every cent I have is tied up in this place. I can't afford a legal battle. Then we sell something. We figure it out. No. Cole's voice was flat, final. I won't drag you down with me. This is my past, my mistake. You should walk away now before— Don't! Mara's voice cut through his spiral like a blade. Don't you dare try to protect me by pushing me away. We're partners. We just stood in the rain and promised to fight for this. You don't get to take it back the first time things get hard. This isn't hard, Mara. This is impossible. If Garrett wins, I lose everything. And if you're tied to me when it happens, then we lose everything together and start over. Again. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. You think I'm afraid of losing everything? I've already lost everything once. I survived it. We'll survive this too. Cole searched her eyes, looking for doubt, for the moment when she'd realize what she was signing up for and back away. But all he saw was determination and something fiercer. Loyalty. Trust. Maybe even love. Why? He asked hoarsely. Why would you risk everything for me? Because you do the same for me. Because we're better together than apart. And because I'm tired of being afraid. She pulled him close. We face this together. We fight this together. And whatever happens, we don't run. Not anymore. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the old world and everything they'd thought they knew about safety and isolation. Inside, two people who'd spent years building walls finally tore down the last of them, choosing partnership over protection, risk over safety, together over alone. The battle for Cole's ranch, for their future, was just beginning, but for the first time in 15 years, Cole Maddox wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. The morning after the flood brought a sky so clear it seemed cruel. Cole stood on his porch watching the sun rise over land he might not own much longer, his coffee growing cold in his hand. Behind him, through the open door, he could hear Mara moving around the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the efficient movements of someone who'd learned to function on no sleep and pure determination. They hadn't slept. After reading Garrett's claim, they'd spent the night going through every document Cole had kept from Montana, deeds, contracts, receipts, anything that might prove the debt wasn't his responsibility. The pile of potentially useful papers was distressingly small. Found something? Mara called out. Cole turned and walked back inside. Mara was sitting at the table, surrounded by papers, holding up a faded letter with a look of grim satisfaction. This is from the Montana Territory Land Office, dated 2 weeks before you left. It shows that Catherine Maddox transferred her portion of the ranch debt to James Garrett as part of a private agreement. She laid it down carefully. If we can prove she did that, and if we can show that you paid off your portion before you left, then Garrett's claim falls apart. I did pay my portion, sold everything I had left, horses, tools, even my father's watch, to clear my name before I came here. Cole sat down heavily. But I don't have proof. The bank records from that time, I never thought I'd need them. Then we get them. We wire the Montana Land Office, the bank, anyone who might have records. We build a case. Mara, that could take months, and legal challenges cost money we don't have. By the time we prove anything, Garrett could have foreclosed. Then we buy time. Mara's eyes were hard as flint, We contest the claim, demand documentation, file counterclaims if we have to. We make this so complicated and expensive that Garrett realizes it's not worth pursuing. Cole looked at her across the table, this woman who'd become his anchor in the storm. You understand what you're signing up for? This could drag on for a year or more. It could bankrupt both of us. And at the end, we might still lose. I understand. But here's what you need to understand. I'm not doing this just to save your ranch. I'm doing it because if we let Garrett take this from you, we're admitting that the past still has power over us, that people who hurt us get to keep hurting us forever. She reached across the table and gripped his hand. I won't live like that anymore. And I won't let you live like that either. The warmth of her hand in his felt like absolution, like permission to fight instead of flee. Cole turned his palm up, threading his fingers through hers, and nodded. All right, we fight, but we do it smart, not desperate. They spent the rest of the morning formulating a plan. First, they needed a lawyer, someone who understood territorial law and had experience with property disputes. Second, they needed to secure their assets, make sure Garrett couldn't seize anything while the case was being argued. Third, they needed to keep working the land because if they let the ranch fail while fighting for it, there'd be nothing left to save. Tom Brennan, when they rode into town that afternoon, listened to their story with growing anger. That son of a... He caught himself glancing at Martha. Man's got a lot of nerve coming after you like this. Everyone in 3 territories knows how hard you've worked this place. Knowing it and proving it in court are different things, Cole said. Do you know any lawyers who might take our case? Tom scratched his jaw thoughtfully. There's Malcolm Pierce over in Cedar Falls. He's expensive, but he's good. Handled a mining dispute last year that everyone said was impossible, and he won. How expensive? $200 just to take the case. More if it goes to trial. Cole's face went tight. $200 was nearly a year's profit, and that was just a start. I don't have that kind of money, Liquid. Everything's tied up in stock and equipment. Then we sell stock, Mara said immediately. We liquidate what we have to and hire Pierce. That's your future you're talking about selling. Your security. Our future, Mara corrected. Our security. Stop trying to separate what's yours from what's mine. We're in this together, remember? Martha Brennan, who'd been listening quietly while wiping down the bar, spoke up. There might be another way. The town's been talking. People know what you two are up against. And people remember how you helped out during the blizzard, Cole, even when you didn't have to. There's some folks who might be willing to help. I don't take charity, Cole said automatically. It's not charity. It's a loan. With interest if you want. But the town takes care of its own, and like it or not, you're part of this town now. She looked at Mara. Both of you. Cole wanted to refuse. Every instinct he'd honed over 15 years screamed at him to reject the offer, to handle this alone, to not owe anyone anything. But Mara's hand found his under the table, squeezing gently, and he heard her earlier words echoing in his head. Real strength isn't about being alone. I'd appreciate that, he said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Any help people can give, I'll pay back, every cent, with interest. Martha smiled. I know you will. Let me talk to some folks. We'll see what we can do. They left the saloon with something they hadn't had that morning, hope. It was fragile, easily broken, but it was real, and it was enough to keep moving forward. The next week was a blur of activity. Cole and Mara rode to Cedar Falls to meet with Malcolm Pierce, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who listened to their story without interrupting, then spent an hour asking pointed questions about dates, documents, and witnesses. It's not impossible, Pierce said finally, but it's not easy either. Garrett's claim has enough legitimacy that a court will take it seriously. We need to prove 3 things: that the debt was transferred to him, that you paid your portion, and that he's filing this claim in bad faith to harass you rather than recover legitimate funds. Can you do it? Mara asked. I can try, but you need to understand, this will be a fight. Garrett clearly has resources if he's pursuing this, which means he can afford to drag it out. Are you prepared for that? Cole and Mara exchanged a look. In that brief glance past everything they'd been through together, the barn fire, the flood, the fever, the late-night conversations where they'd stripped away their armor and shown each other their scars. They'd survived all of it. They could survive this too. We're prepared, Cole said. Pierce nodded. Then we have a case. I'll file a formal response to the claim and start gathering evidence. In the meantime, don't sell anything, don't take on new debt, and for heaven's sake, don't do anything that could be construed as evading legal responsibility. Live your lives, work your land, and let me handle the law." They shook hands and left with the first small victory. Someone was fighting for them. Back in Harmon Creek, true to Martha's word, the community response was immediate and surprising. Pete Garson from the feed store offered to extend credit through the summer. Sarah Holt sent over preserved goods from her boarding house stores. Even old widow Crawford, who Cole had barely spoken to in 15 years, contributed $10 with a note that said simply, "For fighting back." The gesture that moved Cole most came from Henry Walcott at the land office. The older man appeared at the ranch one evening with a ledger under his arm and a determined expression on his weathered face. "I've been going through old records," Henry said without preamble. "Found something interesting. When Mara claimed the Harper property, she paid in cash. That transaction is recorded. But what's also recorded is that the Harper estate had an outstanding loan against it from when old Jack was alive." "I don't understand," Mara said. "The loan was held by a territorial bank that went under 2 years ago. The debt was sold to a collections company, but the company never filed proper claim before the property transferred to you." Henry laid out the ledger. "Technically, you acquired the land free and clear, but if someone wanted to challenge that, they could argue you assumed the debt when you took the property." Cole's stomach dropped. "You're saying Mara could be facing the same thing I am?" "Not if we file a quiet title action first. It's a legal process that clears any potential claims against the property. Costs about $50 in filing fees, takes a few months, but once it's done, no one can come back later and say Mara owes on old debts." "Why are you telling us this?" Mara asked quietly. Henry met her eyes. "Because I've watched you both fight for what you've built. And I've seen how this town changed when two people who'd given up on community found each other and remembered what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. I'm not going to stand by and watch someone take that away over legal technicalities." "Thank you," Cole said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is all over and you're still here." Henry tipped his hat and left, and Cole and Mara stood together in the gathering dusk, overwhelmed by the realization that they weren't as alone as they'd thought. May arrived with the hard work of spring planting. Despite everything hanging over their heads, the land still needed to be worked. Crops didn't wait for legal battles to resolve. Animals needed feeding regardless of who might own them next month. Cole and Mara threw themselves into the work with fierce determination. They were up before dawn, working until after dark, planting fields with a precision that bordered on obsessive. It was partly necessity. They needed a good harvest more than ever, but it was also defiance. Every seed planted was a declaration that they weren't giving up, weren't surrendering, weren't letting fear win. They worked side by side in a partnership that had evolved beyond simple collaboration into something almost telepathic. Cole would reach for a tool and find Mara already handing it to him. Mara would start a task, and Cole would be there to help before she had to ask. They moved together like parts of a single machine, efficient and synchronized. But the nights were harder. When the work stopped and they were left alone with their thoughts, the fear crept back in. Cole would lie awake staring at the ceiling, running through worst-case scenarios. Mara would sit by the window, watching the dark land and wondering if they were building on sand. It was during one of these restless nights that Cole finally spoke the question that had been haunting him. "What if we lose?" Mara turned from the window. They'd fallen into the habit of her staying most nights now, sleeping in Cole's bed while he took the floor, propriety be damned, as she'd said. Neither of them slept well alone anymore. "Then we start over," she said simply. "Where? With what? If Garrett takes the ranch, I'll have nothing, and you'll have sacrificed your security for us." Mara crossed to where he sat on the edge of the bed. "Cole, I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but I need you to understand something. This ranch, this land, it's not what I'm fighting for. Not really." "Then what are you fighting for?" "For the right to choose. For 15 years, you let fear choose for you. You let what Catherine and Garrett did define who you became. And I did the same thing after Thomas died. We both built these prisons and called them safety." She knelt in front of him, taking his hands. "But we're not in those prisons anymore. We broke out. We found each other. And I'll be damned if I let anyone, not Garrett, not the past, not fear itself, put us back in." Cole pulled her up beside him, holding her close. "I love you," he said, the words rough and unpracticed, but absolutely true. "I don't know how to do this, how to be this person who loves someone and trusts them and builds a life with them. But I want to learn. With you." "I love you too," Mara whispered against his chest. "And we'll learn together, one day at a time." They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd been broken learning to be whole, and the fear that had seemed so overwhelming moments before became bearable when shared. The legal battle intensified as spring progressed. Malcolm Pierce filed a comprehensive response to Garrett's claim, challenging every aspect of the documentation and demanding proof of the debt's validity. Garrett responded with his own lawyers, presenting bank records from Montana that seemed to support his position. Back and forth it went, motions and countermotions, affidavits and depositions. Pierce kept Cole and Mara informed but handled the details himself, and they trusted him to navigate the complex legal waters they couldn't hope to understand. But in early June, Pierce sent word that he needed them in Cedar Falls immediately. The judge was demanding a preliminary hearing to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial, and Cole's testimony was essential. They rode to Cedar Falls on a Monday morning, arriving at the courthouse to find it already crowded with curious onlookers. News of the case had spread, the hermit rancher fighting to keep his land from a man who'd betrayed him years ago. It was the kind of story people couldn't resist. Cole stood outside the courthouse, his hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to run. He could feel eyes on him, hear whispered speculation, sense the weight of public scrutiny he'd avoided for 15 years. "Look at me," Mara said quietly. He turned to her, and she took his face in her hands. "You're not alone in there. I'm with you. Pierce is with you. The truth is with you, and no matter what happens, we walk out of here together. Understand?" Cole nodded, drawing strength from her certainty. "Together." They walked into the courthouse side by side. The hearing was brutal. Garrett's lawyer was a slick man from back east who painted Cole as an irresponsible debtor who'd fled Montana to avoid his obligations. He presented documents showing joint debt between Cole and Catherine, bank records with Cole's signature, and testimony from a Montana banker who claimed Cole had never paid his portion. Cole sat through it all, his face carved from stone, while inside he was screaming. The lies were so smooth, so well presented, that even he was starting to doubt his own memory. Had he paid that debt? Had he really left Montana with a clear conscience? Then Pierce stood up for the defense, and everything changed. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Garrett's claims." Pierce laid out a series of documents, each one carefully dated and notarized. First, a receipt from the Montana Territorial Bank showing that Cole Maddox paid $347.82 to settle his portion of the joint debt on March 15th, 2 weeks before he left Montana. Second, a transfer agreement signed by Catherine Maddox and James Garrett, transferring her portion of all marital debts to him in exchange for an undisclosed sum. Third, a letter from the bank president confirming that as of March 20th, Cole Maddox had no outstanding obligations. Garrett's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, we've seen none of these documents. This is highly irregular. I obtained them through proper legal channels from the Montana Land Office and the successor bank that bought out the original institution," Pierce said calmly. "They're all properly certified and authenticated, and they prove conclusively that Mr. Maddox fulfilled his obligations before leaving Montana, and that any remaining debt was Mr. Garrett's responsibility, not my client's." The judge examined the documents carefully. The courtroom was silent enough to hear breathing. Cole felt Mara's hand slip into his under the table, and he held on like a drowning man. Finally, the judge looked up. "Mr. Garrett's lawyer, do you have any evidence that disputes these documents?" The lawyer shuffled through his papers, his confidence visibly shaken. "Your Honor, our records show—" "Yes or no, counselor?" "No, Your Honor, but we maintain that, but that's enough." The judge set the documents down. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mr. Garrett's claim lacks sufficient merit to proceed to trial. The debt in question was satisfied 15 years ago, and the plaintiff has failed to demonstrate any legal basis for collection. Motion dismissed." The gavel came down like a gunshot. For a moment, Cole couldn't process what had happened. Dismissed. The claim was dismissed. They'd won. Mara's hand tightened in his, and when he turned to look at her, Her eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall in public. Pierce was gathering his papers with a small, satisfied smile. And across the courtroom, James Garrett sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. They stood to leave, and Cole found himself face to face with the man who'd betrayed him 15 years ago. Garrett looked older, harder, with the pinched expression of someone who'd spent years chasing easy money and finding only disappointment. "You always were lucky," Garrett said bitterly. "Even now, everything handed to you." Cole looked at this man who'd once been his closest friend, who'd stolen his wife and his future, who'd just tried to take the life he'd built from nothing. And instead of the rage he'd expected to feel, he felt only pity. "Nothing was handed to me," Cole said quietly. "I worked for every inch of what I have, and I'll keep working for it every day for the rest of my life. You should try it sometime, building something instead of just taking." He turned away, Mara at his side, and they walked out of the courthouse into brilliant sunshine. Outside, Pierce shook Cole's hand firmly. "Congratulations, your ranch is secure." "Thanks to you. I don't know how to—" "Thank me by living well, by making that ranch thrive, by proving that good people who work hard can win against those who don't." Pierce glanced at Mara. "And by making an honest woman of her. She stood by you through this whole mess. Don't let that kind of loyalty go unappreciated." "I won't," Cole promised. They rode back to Harmon Creek in the golden light of late afternoon, not speaking, but not needing to. The weight that had pressed down on them for months was gone, lifted by a judge's gavel and the strength they'd found in each other. When they reached the ranch, Cole pulled the horses to a stop at the top of the ridge overlooking his land. Their land, he corrected himself. Whatever the legal document said, this belonged to both of them now. "Marry me," he said. Mara turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her features. "What?" "Marry me. Not because Pierce said to, not because the town expects it, but because I want to. Because I love you. Because you saw past every wall I built and loved me anyway. Because I can't imagine facing another day without you beside me. Cole, we don't have to. I know we don't have to. I want to. For 15 years I did only what I had to, survived, worked, existed. But you taught me there's more than that. There's living, there's choosing joy instead of just avoiding pain. There's building a future instead of hiding from the past." He took her hands. "So I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. I'm choosing a life where I wake up every morning grateful for what I have, instead of afraid of what I might lose." Mara's eyes filled with tears, and this time she let them fall. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because it's practical or proper or expected, but because I love you too. Because you're the most stubborn, infuriating, impossibly brave man I've ever met. Because you make me want to be brave too." Cole kissed her then, there on the ridge overlooking the land they'd fought for, and it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before, like finding something he hadn't known he'd lost. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The same sky that had witnessed Cole's arrival 15 years ago, alone and broken. The same land he'd worked until his hands bled and his back screamed and his heart went numb. But nothing was the same anymore, because he wasn't alone, wasn't broken, wasn't numb. He was alive, he was loved, he was home. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Cole Maddox looked at his future and felt not fear, but hope. They rode down to the ranch as darkness fell, and Cole realized that the night didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of possibility, full of promise, full of the life they were going to build together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one moment of bravery at a time. The battle with Garrett was over, but the real work, the work of building a life together, of learning to trust and love and be vulnerable, was just beginning, and Cole couldn't wait to start. News of the engagement spread through Harmon Creek faster than wildfire through dry grass. By the time Cole and Mara rode into town the next morning to repay the community loans and settle accounts with Malcolm Pierce, half the town already knew, and the other half was catching up fast. Martha Brennan met them at the door of the saloon with a smile that could have lit the whole territory. "About time," she said, pulling Mara into an embrace that surprised them both. "I told Tom months ago you two would end up together. He owes me $5. "You bet on us?" Mara asked, somewhere between amused and appalled. Honey, half the town bet on you. The only question was timing. Martha released her and turned to Cole. And you. 15 years I've known you, and this is the first time I've seen you look actually happy. Don't mess it up. I'll try not to, Cole said, and found he meant it without reservation. They spent the morning settling debts. Pete Garson refused repayment for the extended credit, saying a good harvest would be payment enough. Widow Crawford accepted her $10 back, but immediately donated it to what she called the wedding fund, which apparently Martha had started without consulting anyone. Even Henry Walcott, normally the most practical of men, seemed caught up in the spirit of celebration. "When's the ceremony?" he asked as he filed the quiet title action on Mara's property. "We haven't decided," Mara admitted. "Soon, probably. Neither of us sees much point in a long engagement." "Smart. Life's too short to waste time once you know what you want." Henry stamped the documents with finality. "There. Your land is officially free and clear. No one can touch it." Walking out of the land office, Mara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Security. Not the false security of isolation, but the real kind that came from having your affairs in order, your partnership solid, your future clear. She glanced at Cole, who was carrying the deed papers with the same careful attention he brought to everything important, and felt a surge of affection so intense it almost hurt. "What?" he asked, catching her look. "Nothing. Just, I never thought I'd feel this way again. Safe. Not because I'm alone, but because I'm not." Cole stopped walking and turned to face her fully. They were standing in the middle of Main Street, people passing on both sides, the whole town watching. A year ago, hell, 6 months ago, he would have been mortified by the public attention. Now he didn't care. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "For 15 years I thought safety meant control, meant keeping everyone at a distance, but it just meant I was alone with my fear instead of facing it." He took her hand right there in the street. "This, us, scares me more than anything I've ever done, but it's the first time in my life I've been scared and moving forward anyway instead of just freezing." "Then we keep moving forward," Mara said. "Together." They walked back to the horses hand in hand, and if the whole town was smiling at their backs, well, that was fine. Let them smile. Let them be happy. For once, Cole didn't mind being seen. The wedding was set for the second Sunday in July, giving them enough time to finish spring planting and prepare, but not so much time that they could overthink it. Neither of them wanted anything elaborate, no fancy ceremony, no long guest list, just something simple and honest that reflected who they were. "We could do it at the ranch," Cole suggested one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "By the creek, where the water runs clear." "That's where this really started, isn't it, when we measured the flow together that day?" Mara smiled at the memory. "You corrected my measurement." "You didn't get defensive about it." "Because you were right, and because you weren't trying to prove I was wrong, just trying to help me be accurate." She leaned against his shoulder. "Yeah, the creek works. Simple, meaningful, hours." They sent word to Malcolm Pierce and a handful of others, but mostly they kept it small. Martha insisted on handling food, refusing to take no for an answer. Tom offered to stand up as witness. Henry Walcott volunteered to officiate, having served as justice of the peace before retiring to run the land office. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with work and preparation, but also with something neither Cole nor Mara had experienced in years: joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy in the everyday moments. Working side by side in the fields, sharing meals. Planning not just for the next season, but for the next year, the next 5 years, the rest of their lives. One afternoon, while checking fence lines on the north property, Mara brought up something that had been on her mind. "What do we do about the cabins?" she asked. "We've got 2 houses now, 2 sets of everything. Seems wasteful to maintain both." Cole had been thinking about the same thing. "We could convert yours into a guest house, or use it for hired help if we expand enough to need it. Or we could build something new, something that's ours from the ground up, not yours or mine, but both of ours together." The idea appealed to Cole more than he'd expected. His cabin had served him well for 15 years, but it was built for one person, for isolation, for the man he'd been rather than the man he was becoming. Starting fresh, building something designed for partnership and maybe someday a family, that felt right. "Where would we build?" he asked. Mara pointed to a rise between their two properties, a spot with good drainage, southern exposure, and a view that stretched for miles. There, right on the boundary line. So we're not on your land or mine, but on ours. That's perfect, Cole said. And it was, a physical manifestation of what they were creating together. Not his life or her life, but their life. They started planning that very evening, sketching rough designs by lamplight. Nothing fancy, they were ranchers, not architects, but functional and spacious enough for the future they were building. A large kitchen for working together, separate rooms for privacy when needed, a wide porch for watching sunsets, and a room that neither of them mentioned but both knew was being designed with the possibility of children in mind. We don't have to rush that part, Mara said, as if reading his thoughts. The children part, I mean. If it happens, it happens. If not, we've got each other. But you'd want them, if it happened? Mara was quiet for a moment. Thomas and I tried for 5 years. Never happened. I made my peace with it. She looked up at Cole. But with you, yeah, I'd want that. A chance to do it right this time, to raise someone in a home built on honesty instead of just getting by. Me too, Cole admitted. I never let myself think about it before. Seemed like asking for something I didn't deserve. But now it feels possible. Yeah, possible. They sat together in comfortable silence, planning a future that felt more real with every passing moment. The night before the wedding, Mara stayed at her own cabin, not out of tradition or propriety, but because they both needed a moment alone to process what was about to happen. Cole lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, and realized he wasn't nervous, wasn't afraid, just ready. He'd spent 15 years running from this moment, from the vulnerability and risk that came with loving someone. And now that it was here, he couldn't understand why he'd ever been afraid. The risk was real. People could still leave, still die, still break your heart. But the alternative was the slow death of isolation. And he'd lived that way long enough to know it was worse than any heartbreak could be. Tomorrow he'd stand by the creek with Mara and make promises he actually intended to keep. Tomorrow he'd choose partnership over safety, connection over control, life over mere survival. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he'd do it without fear. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer morning that made you believe the world was good. Cole was up early out of habit, but for once he didn't immediately start working. Instead, he stood on his porch with his coffee and watched the sun rise over land that would soon belong to both of them legally as well as practically. Tom Brennan arrived mid-morning to help Cole get ready, which mostly involved making sure he didn't accidentally put on work clothes out of pure habit. "You clean up nice," Tom observed when Cole emerged in the new shirt and pants he'd bought specifically for this occasion. "Barely recognize you without mud on your boots." "Oh, feels strange," Cole admitted. "Like I'm playing dress-up." "You're getting married, not going to a funeral. Try to look like you're happy about it." "I am happy about it." "Then let your face know." Cole attempted something approximating a smile, and Tom laughed so hard he nearly fell off the porch. "Never mind, just be yourself. Mara knows what she's getting." They rode to the creek together, where Martha had already set up simple decorations, wildflowers in jars, a few chairs, a small table where Henry Walcott was organizing his papers. It was nothing fancy, but it was honest and beautiful in its simplicity. People started arriving around noon. Not many, maybe 20 in total, but each one represented someone who'd supported Cole and Mara through their struggles. Pete Garson and his wife. Sarah Holt from the boarding house. Widow Crawford, dressed in her finest despite the heat. The handful of neighboring ranchers who'd helped with the flood recovery. And then Mara arrived, riding in on her own horse because she'd refused Tom's offer to drive her in a wagon. "I rode myself to Harmon Creek," she'd said. "I'll ride myself to my own wedding." She wore a simple dress in pale blue, nothing elaborate, but she'd left her hair down and there were wildflowers woven into it. And when Cole saw her, everything else in the world seemed to fade to background noise. She dismounted and walked toward him, and he met her halfway, taking her hands. "You're sure about this?" he asked, giving her one last chance to back out. "More sure than I've been about anything," she replied. "You?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But yeah, sure." Henry Walcott cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" They gathered by the creek, the water running clear and cold over smooth stones. The same water they'd measured together months ago when they were still just neighbors pretending they didn't need anyone. Henry's ceremony was brief and to the point, which suited them both. He spoke about partnership, about trust built through shared struggle, about choosing each other every day instead of just once. Marriage isn't about finding someone perfect, Henry said. It's about finding someone whose imperfections you can live with and who can live with yours. About building something together that's stronger than what either of you could build alone. He looked at Cole and Mara. And I've watched you two do exactly that over these past months. You've faced floods, fires, legal battles, and your own stubborn pride. And you've come through it not despite each other, but because of each other. He paused, then smiled. Cole Maddox, do you take Mara Ellison to be your wife? To work beside her, trust her, and choose her every day for the rest of your life? Cole looked into Mara's gray eyes and saw everything he'd been missing for 15 years. Partnership, understanding, home. I do. Mara Ellison, do you take Cole Maddox to be your husband? To stand beside him, challenge him, and choose him every day for the rest of your life? I do, Mara said firmly. Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you married. Cole, you may kiss your wife. Cole cupped Mara's face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her with all the tenderness he'd learned to feel again, and the small crowd erupted in applause. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Martha had prepared enough food to feed twice as many people, and everyone ate and talked and laughed while the afternoon sun beat down warm and golden. Tom told embarrassing stories about Cole's early days in Harmon Creek, carefully edited to avoid the darker truths. Pete Garson gave a toast about stubbornness being a virtue when applied correctly. Even Widow Crawford got up and spoke about the importance of second chances. But the moment that stayed with Cole came later, when most of the guests had left, and he and Mara were sitting by the creek, their feet dangling in the cold water. You know what's strange? Mara said. This morning, I woke up thinking about Thomas. Not sad, just remembering. And I realized I've forgiven him. For dying. For leaving me unprepared for it. We built our whole life around the assumption we'd grow old together, and when he died, I felt betrayed even though I knew it wasn't his fault. Like he'd broken a promise. She leaned against Cole's shoulder. But I get it now. You can't prepare for loss. You can only choose how you live in the meantime. And we chose to love each other, build together, be happy. That was worth it, even if it ended too soon. Cole understood what she was saying. I thought about Catherine this morning, too, and Garrett, and I realized I've let them go. Not because they deserve forgiveness, they don't, but because carrying that hate around was like drinking poison and expecting them to die. It was only hurting me. So we're both free now, Mara said. Marwoom, free from the past, free to build whatever future we want. Yeah, Cole agreed. Free. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, and Cole felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, complete peace. Not the false peace of isolation, but the real kind that came from being known, being loved, being chosen. The construction of the new house began in August, and it became a community project in ways neither Cole nor Mara expected. Tom Brennan showed up one Saturday with lumber he'd gotten at cost. Pete Garson donated roofing materials. 3 neighboring ranchers arrived with tools and strong backs, ready to help with the heavy work. You helped us during the blizzard, one of them said when Cole tried to object. Time to return the favor. They worked through the late summer and into fall, raising walls and fitting rafters, laying floors and installing windows. Cole and Mara worked alongside everyone else, learning as they went, making mistakes and fixing them, slowly bringing their vision to life. The house took shape gradually, larger than either cabin had been, designed for 2 people who each needed space but also wanted to be together. The kitchen was the heart of it, big enough for them to work side by side. The bedroom faced east to catch the sunrise, and the porch wrapped around 2 sides, offering views of both properties and the land they were building together. By October, it was habitable. Not finished, there were still details to complete, refinements to make, but livable. They moved in on a crisp autumn evening, carrying their combined possessions up the hill to a house that belonged to both of them equally. That first night in their new home, they sat on the porch and looked out over the ranch. Both ranches now worked as one, thriving under their combined management. The cattle were fat and healthy. The crops had yielded better than expected. The land that had nearly been lost to Garrett's greed was secure and productive. "We did it," Mara said quietly. "We actually did it." "We did," Cole agreed. "Built something real. Something that'll last. Think we can keep it going, year after year? I think if we can survive everything we've already been through, we can survive anything." He took her hand. "Besides, we're not alone anymore. We've got each other. We've got the community. We've got something worth fighting for." Mara squeezed his hand. "I love you, more every day. I love you too. Even when you tell me I'm doing things wrong. Especially when I tell you you're doing things wrong. Someone has to keep you humble." They laughed together, and it was the easiest, most natural thing in the world. The laughter of two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from broken pieces. Winter came early that year, but Cole and Mara were ready for it. They'd stockpiled supplies, secured the buildings, prepared the animals. And when the first big storm hit in early November, they weathered it together in their warm house, working on plans for spring expansion while the wind howled outside. "I was thinking," Mara said one evening while they sat by the fire, "we might want to consider hiring help come spring. The operation's getting big enough that two people can't handle everything alone." "I was thinking the same thing," Cole admitted. "There's a young couple over in Cedar Falls looking for work. Good references. I could ride over next week, talk to them." "We'll ride over together," Mara corrected. "This is a partnership, remember? We make decisions like this together." "Together," Cole agreed, and the word felt like a promise he'd keep forever. The young couple, Daniel and Rebecca Moore, came to work for them in March, and their presence transformed the ranch in unexpected ways. They were newly married themselves, full of energy and hope, and watching them reminded Cole and Mara of their own early days. Daniel was a hard worker, quick to learn and eager to prove himself. Rebecca had a gift with animals, able to calm even the most fractious horse with patience and a gentle hand. Together they added energy and laughter to the ranch, and Cole found he didn't mind the company as much as he'd expected. "They remind me of us," Mara observed one evening. "We were never that young," Cole replied, but he was smiling. "Maybe not in years, but in hope? In that determination to build something good?" "Yeah, we were exactly like that." With help on the ranch, Cole and Mara found they had time for things beyond just survival. Time to plan further ahead, to experiment with new crops, to build improvements they'd been putting off. Time to just sit on the porch together and watch the sunset without feeling guilty about wasted daylight. And time to talk about the future in concrete terms rather than vague possibilities. "I want to expand the herd next year," Cole said one spring evening. They were walking the property line, checking fence repairs. "We've got the grazing capacity for another 30 head, maybe 40. "Agreed. But I also think we should diversify. Put in an orchard on that southeast slope. Apple trees, maybe some cherry. Won't produce for a few years, but it's good long-term planning." "An orchard," Cole repeated, trying the idea on. That's generational thinking. Trees that'll outlive us." "Exactly. We're not just building for ourselves anymore. We're building something that'll last. Something we can pass on." She didn't say, "to our children," but the implication hung in the air between them. They'd been married almost a year now, and while Mara wasn't pregnant, they both held the possibility gently, hopefully, without pressure or expectation. "All right," Cole said, "an orchard it is. We'll plant it together this fall." They did exactly that, spending October putting in 24 young trees, carefully spacing them, staking them against winter winds. It was back-breaking work, and the trees wouldn't bear fruit for at least 5 years, but every tree planted felt like an act of faith in the future. The second winter of their marriage was easier than the first. They knew each other's rhythms now, knew when to give space and when to push closer. They had their disagreements about management decisions, about money, about how to handle problems as they arose. But they'd learned to argue without destroying, to disagree without distancing. "The secret," Martha Brennan told Mara one day when they were in town, "is remembering that you're on the same team. You're not fighting each other. You're fighting the problem together." "How'd you get so wise?" Mara asked. 30 years of marriage to Tom Brennan. You learn patience or you go crazy. I chose patience. As spring approached again, bringing with it the promise of new growth and new challenges, Mara realized she was late. Not dramatically so, just a week, maybe two. But her body felt different, and one morning she woke up and simply knew. She didn't tell Cole right away. Wanted to be sure, wanted to hold the possibility close for a little while before sharing it. But he noticed anyway. He always noticed. "You all right?" he asked one evening when she'd barely touched her dinner. "Fine. Just tired." "You're never just tired. What's wrong?" Mara looked at this man who'd learned to read her better than anyone ever had, who noticed when she was off by the smallest degree, and decided she couldn't keep it from him even if she wanted to. "I think I might be pregnant," she said. Cole went very still. "You think?" "I'm late, and I feel different. But it's too early to know for sure." For a long moment, Cole didn't move, didn't speak. Then he crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "If it's true?" "Scared," Mara admitted. "I lost Thomas. I know life doesn't come with guarantees, bringing a child into that uncertainty. I know, I'm scared too." Cole pressed his forehead to hers. "But I'm also hopeful. We've built something good here, something strong, and maybe we're ready to share it with someone new." "Maybe we are," Mara agreed. They sat together in the growing darkness, holding on to each other and the fragile possibility growing between them. A month later, the doctor confirmed what they'd both suspected. Mara was pregnant, due sometime in late October. The news spread through Harmon Creek with the usual speed, and the community response was immediate and overwhelming. Martha started knitting baby clothes before Mara even started showing. Rebecca Moore offered advice from her own recent experience. She was 3 months ahead of Mara in her pregnancy. Even crusty old Pete Garson softened enough to offer Cole a discount on supplies for the little one. But the most unexpected response came from Henry Walcott. He appeared at the ranch one evening with a thick envelope and a serious expression. "I've been doing some thinking," Henry said, settling into a chair on the porch, "about legacy and what we leave behind. I'm getting old, Cole. No children of my own, no close family. When I go, the land office will pass to someone else, and that's fine. But I've got some savings put away, and I want it to go somewhere meaningful. Henry, you don't have to—" "I'm not finished. I'm setting up a fund for your child. Education, opportunities, whatever they need. Not a fortune, but enough to give them choices, to make sure they can build on what you've built instead of starting from scratch like we all did." Cole was stunned into silence. Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Because I watched you two come to this town broken and alone, and I watched you find each other and build something beautiful. Because you proved that second chances matter, that people can change, that hope isn't foolish, and because I believe your child deserves every advantage in building on that foundation." Henry stood. "Think of it as an investment in the future of Harmon Creek. You two have made this town better. Your child will too." He left before they could argue, and Cole and Mara sat in stunned silence. "Did that just happen?" Mara finally asked. "I think so." "The world is strange sometimes, in good ways." "Yeah," Cole agreed, "in very good ways." The pregnancy progressed without complication. Mara worked through most of it, refusing to be coddled but accepting help when she needed it. Cole hovered more than she appreciated, but backed off when she told him to, learning yet another balance in their partnership. They spent the summer preparing, building a cradle, setting up a nursery, reading every book they could find about infant care. Daniel and Rebecca offered to take on more responsibilities as Mara's time drew closer, and the community organized itself without being asked, making sure someone checked on them daily as the due date approached. The baby came 3 weeks early, on a crisp October morning when the leaves were just starting to turn. Cole rode for the doctor, while Rebecca stayed with Mara, and by the time he returned, his wife was already well into labor. The birth was hard but not complicated. Mara was strong, and the doctor was experienced, and when the baby finally arrived, a girl, red-faced and howling with indignation at being forced into the cold world, Cole felt something in his chest crack open. He'd thought he understood love, thought he'd learned it with Mara, rediscovered it after years of isolation, but holding his daughter for the first time, Feeling her tiny hand grip his finger with surprising strength, he realized there were depths of feeling he'd never even imagined. "She's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's loud," Mara corrected, but she was smiling, exhausted and radiant. "What should we call her?" They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his daughter, Cole knew. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "After everything we've been through, all the fear and loss and struggle, yeah, Hope is exactly right." The weeks following Hope's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Cole discovered reserves of patience he'd never known he possessed, walking the floors at 3 a.m. with a screaming infant while Mara slept. Mara learned to function on 4 hours of broken sleep and still manage ranch decisions. But they also discovered joy in the smallest moments. Hope's first smile. The way she quieted when Cole sang to her, badly, but with feeling. The wonder of watching her discover the world, seeing everything through new eyes. "She's changed everything," Cole said one evening. They were on the porch, Hope sleeping in Mara's arms, the sunset painting the sky in impossible colors. "Everything and nothing," Mara replied. "We're still us, still partners, still building our life together. But now we've got someone to build it for. Someone to leave it to." "Exactly." They sat in comfortable silence, and Cole thought about the journey that had brought them here. From isolation to partnership, from fear to trust, from survival to something richer and fuller than he'd ever imagined possible. He thought about the man he'd been when he arrived in Harmon Creek 15 years ago, broken, angry, determined never to be hurt again. That man would have looked at this moment, married, father, part of a community, and seen only weakness, only vulnerability, only danger. But that man had been wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. Real strength wasn't about being alone. It was about being brave enough to need people, about building connections even when you knew they could be broken, about choosing hope over fear, trust over control, life over mere existence. Winter came again, as it always did, bringing snow and cold and the challenges that tested everyone in the territories. But Cole and Mara faced it together, with Hope sleeping in her cradle and the ranch thriving around them, and a community that had become family. One evening in January, Cole was reading by the fire while Mara fed Hope, and he looked up to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "Just thinking about how far we've come. 2 years ago, we were strangers, separate, isolated, convinced we didn't need anyone. And now look at us." "Happy?" Cole ventured. "Happy," Mara confirmed. "Not because everything's perfect. It's not. We still have problems, still struggle, still face uncertainty, but we face it together, and that makes all the difference." "Yeah," Cole agreed. "It really does." He set down his book and crossed to sit beside her, wrapping an arm around both his wife and daughter. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside was warmth and light and the family he'd never thought he'd have. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and failed crops, injuries and setbacks, and moments when they wondered if they'd survive. But they always did, because they had each other, had their partnership, had learned the fundamental truth that isolation was weakness and connection was strength. Hope grew into a curious, fearless child who loved the ranch as much as her parents did. They taught her to ride before she could properly walk, taught her to work hard and value honesty and trust in herself. And they told her stories about how they met, about the struggles they'd overcome, about the community that had supported them. "Why were you alone before?" Hope asked one evening when she was 6. They were sitting on the porch of the house Cole and Mara had built together, watching another sunset. "Because we were scared," Mara answered honestly. "We'd both been hurt, and we thought being alone would keep us safe." "But it didn't?" "No," Cole said. "It just made us lonely. Real safety comes from having people you trust, people who stand with you when things get hard." "Like Mama stands with you?" "Exactly like that." Hope considered this seriously. "I'm glad you're not alone anymore." "So are we, sweetheart," Mara said. "So are we." Daniel and Rebecca Moore stayed on, becoming more family than employees. They had 2 children of their own, and the ranch thrived under their combined efforts. The orchard Cole and Mara had planted began to bear fruit, and they expanded operations to include selling apples and preserves alongside cattle. The house on the hill became a gathering place for the community. They hosted harvest celebrations and winter gatherings, and slowly, almost without realizing it, Cole became one of the pillars of Harmon Creek society. Not because he'd changed who he was fundamentally, but because he'd learned to let people in. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mara woke to find Cole already up, standing on the porch with his coffee, looking out over the land they'd built together. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, joining him. "Just thinking about how different my life would be if you hadn't come to Harmon Creek, if you hadn't been brave enough to see past my walls." "I wasn't brave. I was just as scared as you were. But you pushed through it anyway. That's what brave is." He pulled her close. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at life, at love, at everything." "Thank you for being worth the risk," Mara replied. They stood together watching the sun rise over their land, over the ranch they'd built from struggle and determination and trust. The same land Cole had once worked alone, convinced that isolation was safety. The same land that had witnessed their transformation from broken individuals to a unified whole. Hope emerged from the house, 11 years old now, and already showing signs of being as stubborn and independent as both her parents. "Are you two being sentimental again?" "Maybe," Cole admitted. "Well, stop it and come help with breakfast. Aunt Rebecca and Uncle Daniel are coming over and I can't do everything myself." She disappeared back inside and Cole and Mara followed, laughing. The house was warm and full of life, and as Cole moved through it, their home, their life, their choice, he felt nothing but gratitude. For 15 years, he'd been the man no one could move, frozen, isolated, safe and alone. But Mara had moved him, not by force or manipulation, but by simply being herself, by showing him that there was another way to live. She'd moved him from fear to hope, from isolation to community, from survival to truly living. And in doing so, she'd given him everything he'd thought he'd lost forever: purpose, connection, love. The man who'd arrived in Harmon Creek with nothing but a horse and determination to never be hurt again was gone. In his place was someone stronger, not because he was invulnerable, but because he'd learned that vulnerability shared was half as frightening and twice as meaningful. Cole Maddox had spent 15 years being unmovable, and then he'd met a woman who never tried to move him, who'd simply stood beside him and shown him there was strength in motion, in growth, in change. And he'd chosen to change, had chosen her, had chosen hope. That choice had made all the difference. As they sat down to breakfast with family and the laughter of children filled the house Cole and Mara had built together, he realized this was what victory looked like. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of people worth struggling for. The ranch would continue. The land would endure. And the legacy they were building, of partnership, trust, and choosing courage over fear, would outlast them both. Cole reached across the table and took Mara's hand, and she squeezed back. And in that simple gesture was everything they'd learned together. That strength wasn't about being alone, that safety came from connection, and that the bravest thing you could do was trust someone enough to let them matter. They'd both been broken when they started. But broken things, when pieced together carefully and with love, could become something stronger than they'd ever been whole. And that was the truest victory of all.